women in general felt more regret, feelings of guilt and sadness, or also feeling of being used as a tool. Certain cultures also teach women to equate sex with love more than women. That's why virginity is often prized a lot in a lot of cultures. Whereas for men, like they have evolved with this flexibility of sorts that the more mates one can have sex with, the more easy it is to, let's say, give off their genes and things like that. But for men, predominantly, they can separate sex from emotions more easily. Yo guys, namaskaram. So today I wanted to talk about hookups in general because I see that a notion is being propagated that the more one kind of does hookup, the more cool he or she is, and then a lot of us take that belief, internalize it, and then there are a lot of problems around it. Maybe to self-esteem, maybe to decisions that leads to, let's say, long-term regret. So I just wanted to talk about it scientifically, and also maybe lay out a series over the course of the next few days, and what we can do to be more, let's say, open from a scientific thinking model. Firstly, uh, hookups feel common today, but the emotional costs are hidden. So there was a study which talks about how, like, certain people feel regret, and what's the long term, let's say, emotional cost of getting into such acts. So, like, there was a study which had 1,400 college students sharing their latest hookup experience, and the researchers kind of looked at their feelings, motivations, and the context. So, whether they were doing it under the influence of alcohol or was there an emotional intent in those sorts of things. So, firstly, just to set the record straight, what does hookup mean? So, it could be kissing, oral, vaginal sex, all without, let's say, commitment or an expectation of love, or let's say how a relationship works. Casual on the surface, but not, I think, for the heart and mind. So, like, when certain people were asked when they did hookups or when they were going through that process, what was the post hookup emotional experience for them? So, like, emotions are not black and white. Some felt happy, proud, excited, whereas other felt an immense sense of regret, guilt, maybe sadness as well. So many felt both at once, confused and very conflicted. Now here comes the most important point: a subtle differentiation on the genders, like how men versus how women in general reacted. So men in general felt like more pride, more confidence, and more satisfaction, whereas women in general felt more regret, feelings of guilt and sadness, or also feeling of being used as a tool. Now, why does this happen? Now, there are like two reasons to it. One, I think, comes from a biological factor, and one from a sociological factor. So, completely from a biological standpoint, like women bear higher risk because of pregnancy, and there's a certain, I think, emotional cost attached as well, because when women kind of go into this act of sex, they want to feel safe and emotionally bonded, or let's say they go in sexual things with the expectation that there would be a commitment or a relationship which would delve into a long term thing. And then certain cultures also teach women to equate sex with love more than women. That's why virginity is often prized a lot in a lot of cultures. Whereas for men, like they have evolved with this flexibility of sorts that the more mates one can have sex with, the more easy it is to, let's say, give off their genes and things like that. But for men, predominantly, they can separate sex from emotions more easily. But that does not mean it affects them, but in general. So that is why casual sex more often affects women more emotionally than men, especially if they hope for a relationship. Now, there's also this thing about behavior. So let's say a person who is consistently not having, let's say, the sexual discipline to be just focused on one person if he or she is in that relationship. So there's this 4 year itch sort of thing that such a person who just wants to constantly go out and look for new mates, they can only be in a relationship for at max 4 years, not more than that. I think this comes from, if we look at it from a very fundamentalistic and animalistic sense, 4 years are generally the time when a complete toddler, like from 0 years till 4 years, is able to kind of feed for himself and kind of get to know an understanding of the world. So after that, emotional detachment comes naturally, and certain people look for new partners who, let's say, spread genes. But today, I think we expect lifelong monogamy emotionally, but sometimes we just give into our biology and ruin our relationships, ruin our, let's say, long-term health, long-term prospects with relationships. So you might have also seen the recent case of a CEO in a Coldplay concert where he was kind of busted, and then what all losses did he had to bear because of that. So anyhow, back to the point. So this might explain, why people detach emotionally post sex, especially in casual relationships. Now, where does the point of alcohol comes in, and how much of a role does it play for making us feel certain emotions? So hookups under the alcohol influence causes one more regrets, and there's just less satisfaction from that act per se. People like hook up for fun, they don't know what has happened in the night, but wake up with emotional confusion, mental fog, brain fog. And it's a scientifically established fact that alcohol dulls awareness. Like, even if you want to experience it, you can, but it later intensifies the emotional fallout. People feel a heavy sense of regret, or let's say guilt, that why have they consumed so much alcohol. So now comes the most important point. Like, if we look at like both the parties, both the people who are entering, like what do they actually want, what people actually want. So now here's the twist. Like, those who wanted a relationship but got only like sex reported the worst emotional outcomes. Those who were clear that it was just sex, they had an emotional fallout, but there was like much less regret and more peace in general. So I think the whole crux of it is that clarity, it just protects your emotional energy. Right now, hookup culture kind of sells this freedom but hides pain. So the fundamental message is you should be more free, more active sexually, and things like that. We just fail to ask a deeper question, that who is the person who's doing that hookup? Is he like a pained child from within? Because hookups do not mean healing, they often deepen confusion when emotional maturity is missing. So whenever like you're tempted to, let's say, act in such a way, ask yourself that, am I acting from freedom or a wound? Is this compulsive or conscious? Am I ready for like the emotional consequences, and what am I trying to feel through this experience? So I had done one podcast with a brilliant psychologist, his name is Rajni sir. So he had talked about this story that there was a girl, his client, who had come to him. So basically, she had indulged in so many hookups and sexual things that now she felt like taking mud or sand and rubbing across an entire body. So if you want to be psychologically, let's say, unstable and come to that point, then that's a choice that you're consciously making. No. So like when you're wanting to enter into certain experiences, I think just having a long-term perspective of things is important. I don't know if it's good or bad, but this is what the research says. Maybe in the next videos I'll talk about more from a perspective of why do we want to kind of go into certain hookups and things like that. But yeah, this was more of a scientific, let's say, approach or effort to make you understand that there's just not a physical pleasure or fun to hookups, but the cost is also emotional. They leave emotional fingerprints and, let's say, an emotional baggage of sorts which you carry with you for your whole life. So yeah, I just wanted to bring a certain sense of awareness towards it. And now my next video would talk about the alphas and sigmas and whatnot about that shit. So anyhow, let me know what you feel about it. And until then, this is Debashish Pindra from Debu Ki Dastak signing off. Cheers. Bye.